Barely initiated by a speech followed by millions around the world only a few days ago from this country, has the new pact dreamed up by Macron between Africa and France already been shattered. And at the base are the many badly managed feelings. We are going to talk about all these in a moment. Please stay with us. After great speech in France, Macron may have already shot himself in the foot during his visit to Africa. Everything will be different from now on with a new sincere relationship, he seemed to say, and could have believed African. During the conference with young Africans called by Macron during the 20th France-Africa Summit a year ago, Miss Raimoinde Elda Kouane of the civil society intervened, and the admiration of many people who had responded to this demonstration. She had well described this relationship, which until then had caused a problem when she said, and I quote, "If we had to qualify the relation between France and Africa and say that it was a pot, well, this pot was very dirty. Dirty with slight recognitions of the abuses committed, dirty with corruption, dirty with non-transparency, dirty with demeaning vocabularies. And I invite you to skirt it with concrete actions, President Macron. But if you refuse to wash it and still decide to cook in it, I won't eat, we won't eat, Africa won't eat anymore. The meal will be ready, but you will be alone at the table with a difficult appetite. On good terms, alone." End of quote. These are all the problems that have always been at the root of African distrust of France, the gap between what France says with beautiful French and what it does beyond the scenes, Africans believe. They were all the same, the French president, with a few exceptions, but without a very big difference between them in the beautiful promises they gave to Africa to ultimately create only all the misfortunes that rather followed, and of which Francophone Africa has lived. The only proof is in the large gap in terms of development between English-speaking and French-speaking countries in Africa. We really believe that with Macron, who had a sudden little burst of Africanism that things would suddenly go in the right direction, we must stop talking about aid to Africa, Ms. Raimoinde had proposed in the list of solutions. And quoting an African author, she will insist that we do not help to develop, but we develop ourselves, and the world will also develop in itself. Africa will develop on its own. It has been more than a century, she will continue, that development aid has been wandering around Africa, and it does not work. Africa will undoubtedly develop in interdependence with the other nations of the planet, but it will be above all through healthy, transparent, constructive collaborations. So if we have to live together, it will be in interdependence and above all in respect and valuing each other. Indeed, what France says before entering into or deepening its relations with a country in order to end up on the ground of its actions with assassinations, conspiracies and many other disgusting things, it really is really unfortunate for African populations. However, France has always thought either to justify or deny these often so obvious facts, and Macron, who thought he was convinced this time that things would be different after having, as he wanted to make it understood, made France's mea culpa, did not however prevent himself from making blunders in the DRC on the question of Rwanda and the negative role of the French media on young democracies and elections in Africa during its recent journeys that took him to Gabon, Angola, Congo-Brazzaville and the DRC. These blunders risk costing France dearly and calling into questions all its good faith, On the question of the sanctions, which should follow the logical continuation of the condemnation of Rwanda, an opportunity to show us would a man determined to break with his past by refusing not to let himself be corrupted by dark feelings, which prevented him from having healthy relationships with others. Macron did not, however, know how, it seems to me, to rise to the height of the speech he had barely made a few years ago before flying to Africa, and thus reconcile his words with appropriate concrete actions. Thank you to President Macron. Sorry to come back to this. Last December, Secretary of State Chrysula Zakharopoulou officially condemned on behalf of France Rwanda's support for M23. 3 months later, what makes you still unable to do it at the highest level? Why the heavy tongue in relation to this question? Mr. President, why the word aggression is considered a taboo word? Your counterpart right next to you said it 6 times. I counted. Why do you find it difficult to name the Rwandan aggression when all the UN reports and all the international organizations prove it? You spoke earlier about the discourse of truth. The Congolese people would like to hear this truth from your own mouth about the Rwandan aggression. Indeed, what were all the people of common sense expecting on the issue of Rwanda's abuses in eastern DRC and the sanction that should logically follow without too much delay? In any case, not this long journey with words that only took us to realize at the end of a long time that the man could not take responsibility for himself and draw a conclusion as simple as who breaks must pay. A simple concept of law that governs human relations and states and guaranteed by the United Nations. If there was no ambiguity on the part of France when it comes to the Russian aggression and the sanctions that followed, and where it clearly appears that when one attacks another country, whatever the motives, this is unacceptable in a society of civilized people, and there is no place to begin to lend an attentive ear to the aggressor, who must begin by stopping any action of destabilization, or otherwise sanctions will be imposed. But in the case of Rwanda, France seems to want to sin, and when we also know that France shares the Security Council, this procrastination can only be very disappointing. Miss Raimoinde Elda Kouane was right to talk about a dirty pot for lack of transparency and many other disgusting things. It's difficult for a country which has hidden interest in another country, but which, like an iceberg, cannot be hidden beyond measure, to serve as judge in the Security Council when this country is concerned. France should have long since withdrawn from dealing with the conflicts between Rwanda and the DRC, and in its recent performance of sending $20 million military aid to Rwanda for its involvement in Mozambique, where in fact it protects the French oil interest there, is only a provocation towards the DRC and the people of the international community. How else to consider this act if it is not helping Rwandan terrorists supported by international financial interests hungry for free minerals and land, who sow terror in the eastern DRC and the label of M23? Ask any accountant what it would mean to receive a donation from a company that is also doing benevolent works somewhere when it is struck by illegality in the first purpose of its activities. Helping Rwanda at the time when it has been recognized as the perpetrator of abuses in the eastern DRC by the UN and several international organizations, and especially when you are a member of the Security Council or even an ordinary country, comes down to a crime. This is while still putting aside that you chair the Security Council. These amount to making it easier for Rwanda in what it is doing in the DRC, because instead of asphyxiating it, now you are doing the opposite of what the sanctions should have done, by giving it the means to carry out 2 actions on 2 fields at the same time, and even to use these funds completely against the DRC. This is why Macron finds it difficult to talk about sanctions while he's giving breath with the underhand, that's all. Who spoke of a sincere speech for Africa? Would Mélenchon not have been the ideal interlocutor for a new pact between Africa and France? In any case, his message, and we can see that he deeply believes in it, in my opinion, is that he thinks that the French must change from within themselves, must profoundly transform their beliefs, and thus their attitude were going to change and become naturally sincere with themselves and with others without forcing anything. This is also true for every other human being living on this earth, because our fight is not with each other but with ourselves, with our true self. His message is a message of love for all the people of the world, and is appropriate and sincere during this time of crisis with Africa. Did Macron therefore seek to recover a message that did not suit him, and many of us have discovered during the electoral campaign in France? Because you really and deeply need to understand and believe in order to hope to act quite naturally. Is France's problem in its language? And man and language have mutually influenced and grown together over time and created a problem of communication and expression? Is the problem with the French language not in too many words to say something supposed to be very simple? We already know that in any language that if a person starts purging a lot of words, it is because he is probably nervous, and often the lie and the escape is not far away. What to say now if this language in its acceptance and evolution is preparing for this exercise? That is to say, to explain simple concepts with long sentences to better explain itself for one reason or another. So many questions to ask, but in any case, the Bible tells us whether your answer is yes or no. The rest comes from the devil. Something that challenges us all. In a difficulty to speak French perfectly, but with a nice Mediterranean accent, when the French Secretary of State speaks, something magical happens. She looks for words and phrases. She takes the time to think deeply for days. She ends up finding the right words and sentences, but short and necessary. She's serious when she speaks and concentrated, sincere and attractive in faith. At this moment she becomes the symbol of the France in which one can really trust. While some cultures favors the symbiosis between body, mind and soul and the nature that surrounds them, and speak only when it is necessary and little, in what do others put their face to think to oppress others? I would like to say here that it is without prejudice that all this is said, but rather for a much better world. That's all from us. We are going to let you follow, translated for you in English, what has been exchanged between the journalist and the President Tshisekedi and Macron during the Kinshasa press conference on the subject of the Rwandan aggression, and also the French press, a press that we spoke at length in the video entitled The Prowess of President Tshisekedi and the Foreign Media Role in the 2018 elections in the DRC, which you can follow by following the link at the right corner of your video screen or by visiting the JJMB Congo Afrique Monde channel. As from us, we'll see you again soon for a program following this one, where we'll give you our opinion on Macron's worrying answers on these two subjects, which left many of us with bitter mouth. As Macron said, Is the French press only there for the truth and nothing but the truth? Nothing but democracy? Are there no other interests that make them jazz, at least some of the media? What role did the French media play in the 2018 elections in the DRC and others in Africa? 2. Did the DRC fail to protect its border, or other forces add and continue to play, and France in the middle of all this? And finally, we'll talk about the question that should therefore concern us all, and which is, in view of all these, should the DRC open its doors to France or not? Or, on the one hand, did we not want investors to enter through the front door, or should France be treated as a special case? We'll talk about all this in our next show, so please be in the watch for the next issue, because the subject is a big one. Don't forget to continue to contribute to the ongoing national effort for the populations taken hostage by the war in the east of DRC. Find the Pact details in our very first video on the problem of the exploitation of oil from the forests of the Congo. They will also be included in the description below. Bye for now. Mr. President, so we'll now move on questions and answers. Thanks. We are going to give the floor to Michel Kipinda from Okapi Radio. Michel Kipinda has a question on security aspects, I believe. Thank you. Thank you. I'm Michel Kipinda from Radio Okapi. My question is for Mr. Emmanuel Macron. Mr. President, the Congolese memory retains in a fresh way that France played a relevant role in the Rwandan genocide, and especially in the entry of FDLR into the DRC in Operation Turquoise. You remember that there was a humanitarian corridor. You brought in armies with weapons and ammunition despite the opposition of the Congolese authorities. Today, the DRC has already recorded more than 10 million deaths. They are victims of our solidarity. How does France personally intend to solve this problem, because you were there and it was you who brought in these soldiers? How do you intend to repair the damage caused to the Congolese population? That is the first aspect of my question. The second is, since all the reports of the experts of the United Nations, Amnesty International and others attest to the thesis of a Rwandan aggression and the cover of the M23, we note that France is not warm enough to condemn Rwanda and to ask for sanctions, since you chair the UN Security Council, and yet you do so aggressively against Russia. Why this lethargy on the Congolese side? Do you feel more guilty for the death of 800,000 Rwandans than for 10 million Congolese? In addition, you gave $20 million to Rwanda, an aggressor country of the DRC. Can the DRC still continue to consider France as a friend? Thank you, Mr. President.